I think it's fair to say that most people know of Prisma for its type-safe ORM. So that means if you want to get results from your database in a fully type-safe way, or if you want to write to your database and make sure that you're passing in the correct types for your parameters, you can do so using Prisma's ORM. And normally that looks something like prisma.maybe-user.findMany, using the ORM in that fashion. But there are many cases where you might need to drop down to raw SQL in your application. Maybe you're putting together a really complex report and you need a really intricate SQL script in raw SQL. You can do so in Prisma. You could always do so using the query raw feature. But in older versions of Prisma, you couldn't do so in a type-safe fashion. But starting at version 5.19 and now refined in Prisma 6, we can use the typed SQL feature to get full type safety over our raw SQL scripts as well. Today, we're going to take a look at how to do that using a simple example that I've got set up here. Let's take a look at schema.prisma. We've got a user table, we've got a post table, and we're going to do some work here to set up some raw SQL scripts and see how we can use full type safety against those. To get started, we need a database. We're targeting Postgres. We could just set up a local database here, but instead, let's use Prisma Postgres. If we go to console.prisma.io, we can get ourselves a workspace, and we can start a new project. Prisma Postgres is a fully serverless Postgres database provider, and what you can do is spin up a Postgres database for free. It's totally serverless, no cold starts, and we can get started right away. So let's call this Typed SQL Demo. We choose Prisma Postgres to get started. We'll select US East, and let's create the project. All right, looks like we are connected. Our Postgres database has been initiated. Let's copy these environment variables here. We've got a database URL and a Pulse API key. We won't use Pulse just now, but let's put both of these into our environment file. So we can go over here to .env, and let's paste them in. So now that these are in place, let's do our first migration to get our database in sync with what's in our schema. So we can do npx prisma migrate dev. Let's give this first migration a name of init, and that will go and create a migration file and apply our changes against the database. We've got the seed script here, so seed.ts has some data in it. Let's do npx prisma db seed. Looks like the seed has completed. Finally here, let's do npx prisma studio, and we'll see if we can get access to our data in the browser. So back over in the browser, let's get a new tab, and let's go straight to Prisma Studio. And here, we're showing some post records, and we've got our users as well. All right, why don't we see a typical example of how we would get users out of the database. So for example, over here in our index.ts file, what we've got is this users endpoint. We could do a typical call to prisma.user.findMany and just return those users. So we can run this and make sure it is working. Let's come into a new terminal. We'll do npm run dev. Then over in the browser at 3000, if we refresh that, we can't get the root, but we can get users. And there's our 3 users there. So I think as a really simple starting point, let's see how we can get our full list of users using raw SQL. So there's a little bit of setup to do here. Let's go over to our schema file, and in the client section, let's add preview features, and we're going to say we want typed SQL as a preview feature. Next thing we'll do is in our Prisma directory, let's set up an SQL directory. So that's important. That's where Prisma is going to look for any raw SQL files that we might have. Then in that directory, let's create a new file that we'll call getusers.sql. In this file, we can say select star from public.user, so the public schema targeting our user table. And we'll save that. And so what we see here is it's really just a typical SQL script, nothing more than that. All right, so down here in our terminal, let's run something that's going to give us our typed SQL. And that is we need to generate the Prisma client with the SQL flag. So npx prisma generate --SQL. So we do that. That's going to then look into our SQL directory here, our SQL directory, and look for any files that we've got and turn those into type-safe things that we can use in our application. So if we come over to our index.ts file, let's replace this with a call to that getUsers function. And the way that works is this. We can say const users equals await prisma.$. You might remember this, query raw, but now we're going to do query raw typed. Into that, we're going to pass this function called getUsers. We've got to import that, and where we do that is up here. We do import getUsers from @Prisma client SQL. All right, so let's save this, and we'll just prove this out. So we're using this to get our users. We're calling getUsers. Everything looks sound here TypeScript-wise. Let's run this again and see what we get. All right, if we refresh over at 3000, there's our list of users, just like we had before. Why don't we do something a bit more complex now? In our SQL directory, let's create a new file called getPostReports.sql. And I'll paste this in. This was on my clipboard. This is us getting some information from our post table and joining things up to our user table as well. Not terribly complex, but I just want to demo this other script out. So we'll save that. And we'll run the same generation command again with the SQL flag so that we can pick up on that new SQL file that we created. npm run dev on that. We'll run that in just a sec. First, we have to go back over to our index file, and we have to work in our report endpoint here. So let's do const report data equals await prisma.$query raw typed. Let's pass in get post report. We will import that alongside getUsers. Get post report comes from up there. And let's just make sure we can respond with our data. All right, so if we run dev now and we go to /report in the browser, we should see things coming through. There's all of our data for the report. And what I want to look at now is how we get type safety over this result. So just to see that all of this information is typed here, we can do something like report data map. We can take an item. And like we might expect if we were just using the Prisma ORM in its typical fashion, we get type information for what is on each item. So for example, item.authorID, item.createdAt, all of these fields that we expect to see. And we can see what their types are. So authorID being a number, we can see that createdAt here is of type date, that sort of thing. And so where that might come in is, let's say we had this endpoint actually generating a report for us. I've got some stuff on the clipboard here. Let's take a look at this. So I'm going to grab async parser. This comes from a package called JSON to CSV. So async parser is there. We're going to set ourselves up here to actually produce a report from this endpoint. A little bit more here to paste in. So we're going to expect a CSV that takes in some data. And we can give ourselves a constant of data to do just that. Now, data can just be report data. That's going to give us all of the items that are in that report data array. It'll come through as a report. But a common thing that we might need to do is maybe rename the fields on our CSV before the report is generated. And so what's nice about getting the type information from our result is we can do report data.map. We can take an item, and we can return an object that has the field names that we want. So something like post ID, and that can reach into item.postID. And because we have type information here, we know exactly what to access. So we could have title. That similarly will be item.title. We can make sure this works if we come down here and we regenerate our environments and then come over to the browser, go to report. And if we do that, we have got a CSV that opens up. I'll pull it into view here. So here it is opened up. There is our report that we expect to get. All right, so as the last little bit here, why don't we see how we can pass arguments into our raw SQL scripts? Because that is something that we'll typically want to do. And for that, I'm going to copy a little bit more into this get post report SQL script. I am going to say that we're going to have some positional parameters here now, $1 and $2. And the way that it works is we can pass arguments to the functions that are created. So where we go and pass our function like get post report, we'll be able to pass some arguments into there. Looking at the SQL script, what that's going to do is give us an argument to get a certain view count and a certain created at date. So let's pop down here. We had this error from the last time we ran our endpoint, just a node error. We can ignore that for now. Let's go like this. We'll generate again. Now, if we go over to our index file, we'll see that this gives us a red squiggly, and that is because we're expecting to pass some arguments there. Now, what's really interesting here is because we're using Postgres, the typed SQL feature is actually able to infer the types that should go in here. So we see we're supposed to pass a number and a date. And that's because these positional parameters here are actually against certain values from the database, which are taken from the schema, and we know what types they are. Okay, so let's say we want to get anything with a view count of 50, and maybe new date can be our second argument. And into this new date, let's pass something that is in the past. So 2024, 12, maybe 07, something like that. Okay, so the most recent version of this SQL script has been generated. We should be able to use it now. So let's npm run dev. We'll come back to the browser. That report gets produced, and let's take a look. All right, taking a look at the most recent report here, report 5, we get 3 results instead of 4 like we previously got. And that's because we are filtering using those arguments that we've passed in. So why don't we recap here? Let's go through it. So we can use the Prisma data platform. We can use Prisma Postgres specifically to get a serverless database with no cold starts, absolutely free. And we can tie that up to a project where we can run typed SQL. The typed SQL feature, it's as of version 5.19 of Prisma. And what we can do with that is set ourselves up an SQL directory, get some SQL scripts in there, and we can use those and get full type safety if we use query raw typed. That gives us access to passing arguments into our SQL scripts. It gives us full type safety over the result set, over what we pass in, and overall gives us a fully type safe experience across our application. If you've got any questions about typed SQL or about Prisma in general, please feel free to reach out to us. We're at prisma.io on the web, or leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.